But with the Silk Route, I got what's needed, and that is monism, that I firmly believe in, and process. I couldn't put a title on myself for the religion that didn't have a monistic worldview, a monist, unified world that can have endless multiplicity within it and divisions and everything. But it's a unified world, everything relates to everything else. That's just how the universe operates.
Christianity simply doesn't
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So monism is required. The other one is process. But what I then discovered Zoroastrianism that I didn't require when I started, because I like you go to the East, you realize that nomadology that we had in paganism is obviously all the religions. Hinduism has that, right? Hinduism is nomadology. It is what Nietzsche calls the eternal return of the same. So, yeah, every new year, the world is born anew. But it's the same world all over again. Like if the world mimics itself year after year after year, and nothing new really ever happens. All novel, nothing is new under the sun is a perfect example of a nomadological fundamental statement. That is the fundamental religion of humanity. That's the religion we had for 195,000 years, undoubtedly the only religion we have. So I would say nomadology was there. I would say polytheism is nomadology in practice. I would say nomadology is to put people on the move. You had to tell them a story in the evening that tomorrow morning we got to get up and move again. And if you're not moving, you're dead. And behind us is the chaos goddess, and she will kill you. Ahead of us are the Urfathers. And if we just go where they've gone before us, which is the origin of the gods, right? Urfathers. If you go where they've gone before us, we will survive. So I required monism and I required process fundamentally from religion I believe in. Nomadology is obviously a process, and nomadology is monist. So I could have gone all the way and become a Hindu. No. What happened, though, was that I discovered that even in Hindu mysticism, separate from Hinduism, and certainly in Iranian religion with Zoroastrianism and Zoroastrian Reformation, came the idea that we could create a world that's better than the world we live in. And of course, then I'm a Marshall McLuhan guy, and I've studied Hegel. So there has to be condition for us to be able to believe the world could be better than it currently is. That means that could only happen after the art of writing has been introduced. And we all know that without the art of writing, we couldn't have permanent settlements that stay permanent. And we still had violence for like thousands of years. And this is the Girardian universe. The Girardian universe opens up when we settle down. So we need to deal with that.
No.
Yeah, that's
okay.
I think that's a mistake you continually make, actually.
No.
Okay. We cannot.
The Girardian universe happened when humanity happened.
When the first stone was put on on the sacrificial altar.
Okay, I know, but scapegoating, Girard would agree, scapegoating escalated when we had the permanent settlement. Sargatuchian, for example, is shown with the anthropology. The first 1,000 years of permanent settlements were the most violent ever, right? That's very likely. So somebody had to tame that force to begin with. Zoroaster doing it was with Asha, and realizing there's one little loophole in nomadology you could use. This is very Deleuzian. So if Deleuze would sit with us, that he probably agreed that the difference of repetition that he talks about in the 1960s, this little loophole that Nietzsche is looking for, where can the eternal return of the same be broken so that the possibility of novelty exists that you can build from, which is essentially you become an engineer rather than a hunter or a warrior if you have a permanent settlement. Now, how did that shift happen? Well, in nomadology, I would say, while the daughter mimics the mother completely, this is what Lacan calls the woman as the one all with exception, right? The one all without exception. Whereas the phallus is the woman is the non all that then declares it's all. Whereas the all that has an exception is the phallus, right? So that means, coming out of a Lacan understanding, that means if you read Deleuze, there is the possibility for the son to be different from the father. And that probably was the case in the nomadic tribe. The son was different from the father, so he could come up with a novel solution to a current problem. That solution would then be forgotten. That's why you had to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. But by storing that information, that means the father could die and know, my son will know more when he's a man now than I did when I was his age. That little shift means that, as Deleuze says, with every return of the same, there's a small deviation, and that deviation has the possibility of being a novelty on which we can build if we can only store it. You see how this is even the beginning of artificial intelligence today. It starts with that revolution. Zoroaster saw that, Deleuze completed that revolution then in 1967. Between it, you get Nietzsche and all these other guys and philosophers who thought of where did the possibility for novelty exist? And how could you build that novelty? Because all of civilization, all of technological evolution, the last 5,000 years is built on that one thing.
On
and
novelty.
I think that's why it's a phallic, it's a phallic drive. That's what Zoroaster was adamant about. He said, the women hold up the world, whereas the men have this little tiny possibility of innovation. And I'm interested in it because I'm studying where did the hunter warrior shift into becoming the engineer who then remade the world. That to me is what civilization is all about. That change of phallic direction. And for me, that means I got so fascinated with that. And then, like you, Thomas, I went back and studied Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Abrahamic religions with fresh eyes, because I realized, okay, they're all sons and daughters of Zoroastrianism in the sense that the eventology went west. And the only way eventology then occurred in the East was through Confucianism and state bureaucracies and the organization of society. And it never developed into an idea of a better, improved world. It was just maintenance. Confucianism would never be on maintenance. Whereas the idea that the world can be better than it is today.
Actually, I think it's the opposite. Mostly in most of the Eastern religion is the world is, we're in the Kali Yuga cycle. It's like this big cycle where we're heading towards more and more fragmentation and everything's falling apart, for the next, 10,000 years. And then there'll be a new cycle. But
that is nomadology. Jainism is the ultimate form of nomadology. And it's incredibly popular with women. I wonder why. and women that I highly respect. I love nomadology. It is half the world. This is, in our book, Process and Event. This is process. That's what process is. But so event...
this is kind of maybe simple, but what I'm hearing is like there's a kind of religion that is very pessimistic and is all, it's all about, things falling apart. And then there's another kind of religion that is about building, or is constructive, or it's about this building the city on the hill rather than just.
I had that question in India last fall. We toured India when Peter Taus and I traveled through India, and the Indian students are smart and they're just like, we're gonna be like the Chinese have become the manufacturers of the world and moved into the middle class. In India, we're all going to be the computer programmers of the world, but that's just factory work. And they'll know that. So how could Indians become innovative and creative? And I said, well, then you have to go into phallic mode. And you've got one tradition in Indian history, Shiva, exactly, Shaivism. But Shaivism is so forgotten and put aside that, it has to be resurrected. I said, without a Shaivist renaissance in India, you will not have the capacity for innovation and novelty. And you'll be cursed by it because you will be at the end loop of the world economy. You'll be the guy, you'll be the place where we're going, don't even count the corona corpses today. That's the tragedy of India today, still today. Only 12% of people who die in India even get a death certificate. 88% of bodies are just left. Right? So you don't even know whether corona is running amok in India or not. That's still the tragedy of India. And the tragedy of India is that it gets stuck in a nomadology without an eventology. And in a world of 7 billion people, you must have an eventology. You must have a vision that we can maintain this population, even grow to 10 billion and still not ruin the planet and still fix the idea that we have to love strangers rather than kill them. And all these massive existential problems you have ahead of us, including locking up the atomic bombs and locking up the biological weapons. We've just been reminded of the threats to ourselves that we are, right? Now, that's not even possible to me without an eventology. There has to be a new message. And that's
what about the Far East? What about the more industrious countries like Korea and Japan? And are they industrious because they've inherited Western capitalism?
No, but they've inherited. Okay, the shared heritage of Zoroastrianism and Taoism that came through the Silk Route, which is called Zen in Japan, it's called Xian in Korea, is definitely eventological. There's strong eventology in Zen and Xian. But it goes through that you mimic and you learn from your master, and then you do the same thing, and you can improve it and make it even better.
Well, you don't have this kind of, let's say, narrative structure that like the Hebrew religion has, whereas, you're on your way somewhere and...
No, not in your own journey. No, these are tribal collective societies. They've never had individualism. Not at all. It's unheard of. It's unthinkable. Individualism with Descartes as a sort of a vulgar form of ultimate Christianity. And then, of course, I would say the ultimate form.
Well, I think there's something unique about Judaism. It's like that is very different than let's say if it's an eventology, it's a very different kind of eventology than Eastern.
Judaism kept nomadology and eventology in parallel. That's why I call Judaism and Zoroastrianism the grown-up faith coming out of the Middle East, and I consider Islam and Christianity to be pop religions. The reason is that they kept nomadology and eventology on two different levels. It's just a question of this is just two different levels. The eventology is kept basically for men. It's the priestly mystical religion, Zurvanism, Zoroastrianism. And then, of course, it's like a folk religion for the military guys, and that's Mithraism, but even the Roman Empire inherited from the Persians. Because it's such a clever idea to take the military out of the polytheistic folk religion that women basically practiced and then put them in another religious realm, which was Mithraism. And of course, the cult of Mithras and St. George and the Dragon, all these things are military myths. The military mythology had its own religion. So with the Persians, it was natural. We have Mithraism, with Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is the overall ship. But if people then want to practice a folk religion, which was essentially the same as Hinduism and the same as European paganism, with the different gods and goddesses, that's just, if they don't have that, if they don't have the lesser gods, the people out there, they'll worship Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe, whatever. I mean, they celebrate celebrities. That's what common people do. Mm-hmm. And we should allow them to, just like we teach them sutras, they can become good parents. And they will be slaves, but since they don't aspire to be masters in each instance, that's okay. That's like 90% of the population. That's fine. They probably consider us to be mad heads anyway, and that's perfectly fine. They'll probably come to visit us every 7 years when they need us, and the other 6 years we're probably more likely to become scapegoats if we walk into the village more than anything. But we can't stay there. We had to pursue another journey, and as in the nomadology, you can definitely be shamanic. You can be androgynous, go between men and women, outer and inner circuit, and you can also be shamanic caste, which means you go between the tribes. You can go to New Guinea. Even Jared Diamond's new book writes about this, that he discovered that New Guinea had some people that were allowed to walk freely between the tribes, even in the middle of a war, and they weren't wearing a red cross or anything. They were just shamans, right? So, shamanic caste proven exists in any culture. That's nomadology. That's where we come from. That's 195,000 years at least out of the last 200,000 years.
Okay, well, Mike, I have a question. So the problem is that this kind of runs the risk to bring back the victimage mechanism, right? So you have a tribe. So usually tribes, they are held together, and they are, the violence within the tribe is pacified by turning the violence against the outsider. Which is what Carl Schmitt basically says, right? The political requires an enemy. So how are you going to create tribes that do not make use of this very dangerous mechanism?
Yeah,
that's what's currently going on, right? People are forming all these tribes, and they actually create a cohesion within the tribe by turning to an external enemy.
Yeah. My response to that as a philosopher is to say that you can either be a winner or a loser in a very fundamental sense. You can either become an underclass person or an upper class person in the digital age. So if you stay with your tribe, your echo chamber, that's a great word for it these days. Echo chamber means that you're stuck with your own tribe that only tells you what you want to hear. If you stay there, your mind will never grow. You'll be stupid idiot, you'll be left there, and you'll be left behind. It's like staying in the village was during urbanization.
Yeah, and maybe
you could move to the city.
Maybe you would start to look for a scapegoat and want to sacrifice.
You probably will too.
In the tribe
okay. But that's what happens in villages. But if you want to move into the equivalent of the urban realm today, which is like you want to be successful in the digital realm, the first thing you must do is that you must keep your algorithm clean and pure. So you need to keep the corruption of politics, and you need to keep the manipulation of the market out of there, right? Or I would say the corruption of money and the manipulation of politics. That's the better description. So that's bad matriarchy and bad patriarchy. You need to keep them out. So it's your and your community's algorithm. That algorithm then, if you're going to be successful, needs challenge. It needs tantra. It needs
It's
needs
the
to get out of
positive
its comfort
antagonism
zone.
that you're talking about.
Yeah,
like
Tantra
a kind of open antagonism.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of
So
this.
Tantra is tied to antagonism. It's tied to the shocking, the ambivalent, the things you can't make up your mind about. And that's only then are you truly digital grown up. I can assure you, this will be the success recipe in the digital age. So that's what I try to do. I basically try to tell people that, yeah, you can comfortably probably stay in your echo chamber, find your own little local scapegoat and do all those shitty things the pagans have done in the past. But, that will happen, very likely to happen. It will happen in small communities, digital communities, physical communities. Yes, I don't think it's going to be over in a long time soon. But if you want to be successful, staying within the echo chamber is not going to make you smart. It's a bit like convincing somebody in the 1850s that you can go to school for a few years and then probably go back to work on a farm. Or you can go to school and aspire to one day go to university and get a higher education and move to a city and be highly successful. And I don't think there's a better way of telling people the story about how life operates. That's what the elders tell adults, and this is what all adults should tell the kids. Because it's true.
Has he answered your question, Thomas? I have a feeling like there's more to your question than that, though.
Well,
there's more going on.
Yeah, well, the thing is that, if a small mind, let's say the minority kind of gets it right, that's great, but the rest will be very destructive.
Yeah,
and they will destroy it for the others as well.
And
right?
I don't have any hope for that at all to solve that problem. That's why we addressed it in digital libido, and we said this is going to be terrible the next 50 years. So expect hard times.
Yes, because all this tribalism, it sounds like you're celebrating it, but it's also going to be
it's problematic.
It's also
absolutely
going to be pretty.
Yeah. That's why I think we need to keep nation states and structures that actually can keep certain things in place. I expect a certain level of police state will be necessary. I'm not naive about that either. I know Senseocracy will be called for, and I expect Senseocracy to happen, meaning that we will have censors absolutely everywhere that collect data about absolutely everything we do. Okay. Because people would demand it, because they will demand safety, and they'll demand, being safe from pandemics, and demand for.
Yeah, it just required a little flu, right? Everybody's just going to embrace all the.
You'll be shocked at how many new dictatorships we'll have on this planet, and how many democracies will be gone when this is
Actually, I was looking at a little clip from Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about how when the people get more and more authoritarian, the more there are. In bacteria, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like the pandemics. The more pandemics there are, the more flus and what do you call that? What's the word?
Temporarily, you have more dictatorships.
Then really people get very extremely authoritarian, and
yes, they do. But since pandemics killed people, actually, the slaves of society also can benefit from it. That's what happened after the plague in the 14th century in Europe. We wouldn't have had the Renaissance, and wouldn't have had the Reformation, and none of these things. And probably the printing press wouldn't have taken off in Europe if it had been for the plague before that. So the complexity grows over the time, but temporarily, yet it causes authoritarianism. I mean, Wall Street, 1929, Adolf Hitler, 1933. Of course, they're connected. So, authoritarianism grows when these things happen. Police state will be there. That's why we're now philosophically working on a response to the Chinese Communist Party's fantasy of a dictatorship and a one-party Senseocracy.
That's important, yeah.
That's how we work with Koreans and the Taiwanese. Söderqvist has been in Taiwan for many years. Taos and I are going to Korea this fall. As soon as we can start flying, get out of lockdown, we'll be there. We're incredibly fascinated with how the East Asian democracies have somehow managed to stay democracies while also actually practicing Senseocracy before Europe has even considered it. So we can respond and say, okay, so what are the benefits of a pluralistic Senseocracy? And how can we achieve it? How can we build artificial intelligence to encourage pluralism within the Senseocracy? Okay, number one, you cannot be innovative and you cannot go for novelty, because if you live in a dictatorship, what will you do? Mimic. And you'll be doing nothing to mimic. Again, Girard's nightmare of a completely mimicking society will happen in any dictatorship, starting in Akhenaten's Egypt, going on to Hitler in Germany. That's why, I tell all the kids these days, not only should you watch Chernobyl to understand how bad a dictatorship is, because the information flows that are so corrupted and destructible. And that's why China kept the virus to itself for 4 months and then caused the havoc in the world that it caused. That's what the Chinese Communist Party should be really held accountable to, that they're a communist party and a dictatorship, and that's why they caused us havoc. The same thing goes for any of these systems, and that's why I think the Tin Drum, that beautiful old film, the German film from the 60s, you know, with the dwarf and the old kid, and you know, and when you see like underneath the Nazi mask, when you see actually that beneath all this beautiful, it was just a shadow and a mess. This is like a thin surface of aesthetic beauty, and when you look back at the aesthetic self, you see how banal and childish it all is. I mean, Hitler was the ultimate Platonist Gnostic, right? Him and Khomeini, Platonist Gnostics, both of them. And that's why the response to that Gnosticism and the Platonism is to say, wait a second, we know from history that open and free societies with tons of trade tend to be more peaceful and profitable in the long run, and freedom has its own value here. Mm-hmm. So we need to philosophically respond to the Chinese. What happened in Europe when the corona hit speaks volumes. Everybody copied China. They mimicked, like Girard says they would. They mimicked because they didn't have a model. And when you don't model, what do? You mimic. So they all mimicked the Chinese Communist Party. And all the politicians of Europe behaved with their lockdowns as if they were Chinese Communist Party dictators. Seriously.
Yeah.
That's how vulnerable we are, because we haven't philosophically prepared for the digital age, and we're working with it now, aren't we? We're working fast to respond to that. And we need to work with the Koreans and the Japanese and the Taiwanese, and anybody out there understands Senseocracy undeniably will happen. It will have enormous benefits too. Mm-hmm. It will make it easier to handle pandemics. But at the end of the day, to me, the biggest question of our time is, what are we as human beings going to tell the machine when the machine asks us, what does it mean to be human? Gotta have an answer.
I'm wondering about a link between this cosmopolitan pluralism that you're talking about, and Tantra again.
Yep.
Because I was talking about in Tantra how there's this sort of pluralistic kind of like, you know, expression. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree.
And for somehow, even though Tantra has to be done in secret, and it can't be a very public, you know, affair. At the same time, it seems to be very important, maybe in a less
absolutely
explicit kind of outer way, right? In an inner way.
Nobody hates Tantra more than the dictator.
Yeah.
Okay, I would say Tantra.
Well, actually, that's why all the tantric iconography was wiped out in the 12th century by Islam, and you know, Tantra was all the way all over the East. It wasn't just in Tibet, and it was all over the place at one point. All that iconography was destroyed, and all the demon creatures, and you just had these sort of, you know, whitewashed kind of Buddhas, and you know, anyway.
Yeah,
I noticed that in the
Pablo
Ghibli Museum.
Pablo Vasquez, some of the Kurds have done research on it. There were centers called Kastags, and Kastag is actually the origin of what later becomes the cloisters. What do you say in Latin? Clostrums. That became the cloisters, and then later the monasteries of Europe and Christianity. The idea came from the Middle East. It came from the Silk Route, and the Zoroastrians obviously were inspired by the Indians and the Chinese, and they built Kastags. The Kastags were locations where you went for tantric practice.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Yes. So we want to create a Kastag movement, obviously now. It's part of the Zoroastrian Renaissance we're working on, and not just fire temples and things, but the Kastags. I think the Kastag is a wonderful way of both looking at the monasteries, the proud monasteries of Taoism and Buddhism, and, you know, the great monasteries of Christianity too, and then respond to them and say that, well, Zoroastrian had his own tradition, but he was wiped out by the Muslims. You're absolutely right. They didn't want any see end of it.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want the Tantra. Islam is...
Because they wanted purity. They wanted, you know...
It's pop, Gnosticism.
Order, and they wanted purity, and they wanted...
I would say Islam is the ultimate form of a decentralized, loose network of very high-minded pillar saints. So for good or bad, Islam doesn't have a center. And in Shia Islam, it is the religion that you must follow your local mullah's interpretation of the scripture. And since there are local mullahs everywhere, and you just move from one village to the next, you get a different religion. Now, the great thing about that is that actually it's kind of surprising that Shia Islam wasn't wiped out, because it obviously doesn't have a center. It really reminds me of the echo chambers today. Like, you stay in your own village, you hear the same message every time. This old man called the mullah, you must follow him. You must not be any smarter than he is. You must never be challenging him or be challenged by him. Like, okay, so that's a local sort of Shia Muslim community. Okay, and Sunni just says that, well, the text itself replaces the teacher, so you must follow it literally. And of course, any religion that has a literal interpretation of a text has probably missed the whole point with religion in the first place. 11-year-olds, watch out for them. 11-year-olds who don't have a sex life yet, you give them a throne or you give them a pillar to sit on, and you get the pillar saints and the boy pharaohs of the world, and they've been the problem ever since. So you give power to somebody who's not mature enough to contain and understand power yet, you get problems. That means ultimately, to me, the tyrant is not so much a compromise between the priest and the chieftain, but rather the failure of both the chief and the priest to step up. And that means a little boy who aspires to be a priest thinks, I can have it all. Or a little boy who aspires to be chieftain thinks, I can have it all. And that's the tyrants of history, the dictators of history, and they don't stay long, but they cause enormous havoc while we have them. And these days, these are the guys that are going to blow off the bomb and blow us all up the day it happens. So we got to get them out of the way. And we got to find a mythology where we kill them. And I don't think collectivism is the way forward, because it ended up in North Korean Stalinism. That is collectivism in its purest form ever. And individualism ended up with a religion called Scientology in California and Hollywood. Of course, the ultimate individualism is a guy who's so damn narcissistic, he goes to a cult full of narcissists and pays them $3,000 a second to have his astrology done for him. Okay, how could anything be more stupid than that? But that is Cartesian individualism par excellence. It is Scientology. So you got Scientology on one hand, and you got North Korean Stalinism on the other. Okay, if these are the two extremes of neurosis and psychosis, maybe we can just please try to find something right in between and work from there, which to me is tribalism. But within tribalism today, we have intertribalism, intertribalism. If you want to stay intertribal in your own echo chamber, you're a loser. If you go intertribal and start exploring the challenges of actually trading with and communicating with other tribes in your own, you'll be a winner. Guaranteed.
Mm-hmm. So that's networking, a network society again, sort of.
But
is it?
From this conversation, I would say Tantra and the Bard Absolute. The Tantra and the Bard Absolute are absolutely tied together.
What did you say, Thomas?
Yeah.
Well, I said, like, so some time ago we discussed, this guru model, right? Which is actually, I mean, it's often vilified, but I mean, there's something to say for it. But often Tantra is kind of transferred by looking at how somebody is in the world, right? But there is we mentioned Osho, right? Obviously an example of a guru gone rogue. So you don't want to go there. But now we basically, so you can kind of, it's the network is the guru, right? You learn from your network, you learn from your, from the, what is it, I guess Alexander would call it the tribe, right? And better make sure that the tribe is not homogeneous, that includes different religions, so you can, for example, as we did, learn from Buddhism, so that we can actually have a decent connection with Christianity again. That's why broadening your horizon, then you can start looking at your own culture again.
Yeah. Well, that just reminds me of, if you practice a tradition, you practice Tantric Buddhism, for example, it's best not to just study the text of Tantric Buddhism. It's best to study as many things as possible, and that, in order to become like a cosmopolitan person rather than, a narrow, becoming narrow in your, as you say, stuck in your I don't know. I've talked to a lot of Buddhists who sort of, they just become kind of parroting different Buddhist,
that's why Trungpa is such a great guy, right?
Yeah.
Trungpa warned against, Buddhism is not about like wearing funny clothes and adopting the culture of the
that's
countries
something
of
terrible.
Origin, right?
People do that.
People love that, right? And they start wearing these weird clothes and I mean, it's great that I've spent years reading Longchempa, right? I absolutely love it. But you can read Whitehead. You can meditate on Whitehead. If you're interested in some of these metaphysics or some of these philosophies. I mean, we have fantastic philosophers that talk about exactly the same topics, and they don't come with all this cultural luggage that you have to kind of go through, right? Which is very difficult for us to absorb. And I think that is a very good practice.
No, I agree. And I would say the closest we have, but unfortunately it's a lot more boring than Tantra, the closest we have in the West that still attempts the same thing is psychoanalysis. And
Lacan is crazy wisdom teacher, right? That's very clear.
Lacan is crazy wisdom. Yeah, he absolutely
total crazy wisdom. Yeah.
And so is Jung. I wouldn't say that about Freud. Freud tried to stay coherent in things he did, but certainly when you get into Jung, much more art than it is science, certainly.
But Jung was, Lacan was mischievous.
True.
Characteristic
so was Jung, actually. If you read about him, if you read from his disciples, he was pretty mischievous as well. But
he was okay.
Okay.
But psychoanalysis has the tantric about it, and that's exactly why psychoanalysis cannot be practiced within the state order. You cannot be on a state bureaucracy salary and be a psychoanalyst. You can be a psychotherapist, a psychologist, but then you just serve the system, because the psychoanalyst first and foremost
it's outside of the system.
How to question the system, which is exactly what Tantra does. Tantra teaches you that ultimately you must be your own judge over your own reality, meaning that you must see through the system. You must see through, to understand its corruption, to understand its manipulation, to understand also within you, actually, that you are 99% nature and just a tiny, tiny little sliver of some kind of culture on top of it that maybe through prohibition we could train into you. But, other than that, it's you're wild and the world is wild. And psychoanalysis teaches you that. But on the couch, it's kind of boring. With Tantra, at least you get to fucking take drugs and tons of shit. So I prefer to be tantric over to be psychoanalytical, but they share exactly this idea of the barred absolute. You retract from the world, you move outside of the world, and then you see through the world, and you become actually critical of the society you live in. But whether you want to be involved in that society or not, or whether you prioritize other things, probably has to do with the times you live in. And it probably has to do with your archetype, personality type. You don't necessarily have to go back into the square and get engaged and be an activist. But you certainly see that, a few things could certainly be done to fix things. If I get a chance to do it, I probably would. But it doesn't necessarily, one of the things coming out of Crazy Wisdom, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to do it. I can make the choice to stay retracted or to do something else. There's no moral obligation on me to go in there and improve the world.
Yeah.
You're perfectly okay to be
because you're not a soldier.
I would say that you can stay within process and ignore event if you choose to do so. I cannot argue against you if you decide to go nomadological, because the nomadology presents a perfectly viable narrative that includes all of humanity. But if you're interested in using what happens to be something beneficial that your son could, pick up from you and improve on, and somehow you get a kick out of that, then I'm all welcoming it, because that's what Eventology teaches you can do. You can improve on and work on the world. And these days, probably even you have to, because you need to build around and avoid certain existential threats. That's why I preach ecotopianism and cosmopositivism. But ecotopianism, which is the completion of the agricultural revolution, and cosmopolitanism is the completion of the urban industrial revolution, and then syntheism is actually the turn of religion away from the religion of magic toward the religion of technology. That's what syntheism is. So it prepares us for a machine as a messiah that we could properly collaborate with. Well, the machine should do what the machine is good at, which is probably logos, and we should focus on what human beings are good at, which is pathos, to then find a shared mythos. That's how I see syntheism. That's where it comes in. And then, of course, you can go back to any of the religions and discover that the religion of technology was there all along. It's part of all parts of religion that teach you how to be a grown-up, take responsibility for yourself and others, and then if you can, improve on the world. All of that is religion of technology. It's not religion of magic. Religion of magic was part of the folk religion, right?
John calls it psychotechnology, and then there's technology too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Psychotechnology.
Yeah, so we don't need telepathic, miracles any longer. We don't need to walk on water or anything like that. Or why? Because we have boats, and then we have water skiing, and we have smartphones. We have technologies now that we've invented simply because we had magic, and magic made young guys think that I could actually make that happen for real. And that's the engineering mindset. That's where eventology starts. This is what eventological religions that deal with the phallic should deal with. This is phallic eventology to me. And I'm interested, anybody out there is interested in exploring phallic eventology. This is why I converted Zoroastrianism, because it's all about phallic eventology. It's the center of that religion. But it doesn't mean the trace of phallic eventology doesn't exist in other cultures. Of course it does, especially today. All of civilization is about that. We haven't improved at all. Technology is the entire improvement. It's everything that makes the world different today from what it was 5 years ago is a direct result of technology.
I'm trying to make the link between technology and Tantra. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, well, technology can be taught Sutra, but maybe not technological innovation. I don't know. But technological mimicry can. And that's a large part of practice technology. 99.5% of practice technology is just mimicking. But the one part that is the in innovation of the new technology probably would require a tantric mindset or a more laboratory mode, right? And in the laboratory mode has to be what? Retraction, exclusion, moving out of society, separating yourself to go into a truly innovative mode.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tantric mindset that gets you out of the copying, right? I mean, it's what Peter Thiel calls, going from 0 to 1 instead of going from 1 to n.
Yeah. I agree strongly.
You can train this mindset using tantric practices. So that's basically the big goal, right?
Yeah,
and maybe
I think we said that last time, didn't we? We say that crazy wisdom is going beyond mimesis or.
That's what Alexander said. That's behavior that cannot be mimicked.
Behavior that cannot be mimicked, right?
We haven't really talked about that very much, but it can be inherently very, very problematic, right? This mimesis. And basically, it's behavior that cannot be copied. I think that's a very nice way of looking at crazy. I mean, look at Monty Python, right? I mean, crazy wisdom isn't always like sex and drugs and whatever. I mean, look at Monty Python. I mean, there's something that's kind of a form of crazy wisdom, right? It makes you think and it says something new in a very surprising way. And it has all the
I think that's what it is in some way. In some level, it's just pure creation. It's aligning yourself with this pure creative act.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I don't think it's
real art. I mean, real art.
That's why the metaphor is sexuality.
And art is not transformative unless it has a tantric quality. Otherwise, it's just decoration. That's what happens when you mimic something. It's not art. Art requires novelty.
Yeah. And that's why the conservative people really don't like art very much, because they want to keep. Of course they don't. They want to keep creating icons of the same thing, and they want to keep the society together.
Dictators hate it. That's why dictators hate it, and all they want is mimicking boring, bland, infantile aesthetics. That's why always dictatorships always look boringly ugly. They look like. Yeah, it's like nobody.
The first people they kill is the artist,
and everything is the same. So every year is repetitive. So everything looks like Stalin's Moscow in 1953 for the next 40 years without any change at all. That's what's conservative. Aesthetic conservatism is exactly what dictators love, precisely because they hate Tantra, they hate art. So that's why they blow up with aesthetics that. It's just infantile. Hitler wanted to copy his fantasy of what Greece looked like 2,000 years ago. He didn't want anything else. And then he had his fantasies about the perfect Jehovah's Witness style German farm. which never existed, of course.
And he was the failed artist too, wasn't he?
Totally failed. He was failed precisely because he could not beat. He didn't have the talent to be tantric. He didn't have the talent for novelty at all. Hitler is the ultimate mimicker. He mimics. He's a boy. He's a Platonist Gnostic, and he's 11 years old, and he wants to mimic all the time. In the blandest,
a spectacular example of the use of the victimage mechanism, right? It's an extreme return to paganism.
Yeah,
essentially.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gnosticism and paganism. That's exactly Nazism in Germany. It's paganism and Gnosticism combined. That's exactly what it is.
That's maybe a good way to put it, because the Gnosticism and paganism that made some weird cocktail, and then it completely exploded.
Yeah. Khomeini in Iran is a good example too, because he's the merger of Islamic Gnosticism, and even Islamic theologians don't even understand what Khomeini was all about. He was even rare and weird to the Shia Muslims. He was incredibly charismatic. He didn't stay true to a single word he ever said in his life. He only saw like the benefit of his own narcissistic mission. And he was incredibly Gnostic. He saw himself as a Gnostic mystic, very similar to Hitler. I mean, he was terrible, very similar to Hitler, and popular too, because
it's something to do also with an inability to kind of see the humor of existence on some level. It's like,
they don't have a sense of humor at all. Again, humor is pathos. Humor is machines cannot crack jokes. Definitely something human beings do, and definitely something is tantric. So we are at our best are humans, and we go towards the human.
And not just cracking jokes, but humor in the sense of like real humor. It's like the humors or something, or I don't know what I'm trying to say here.
I think Simon Critcher wrote a book about
like there's something extremely humorous about Chogyam Trungpa called it this blue pancake that falls from the sky. It's like your whole enterprise has this kind of humor to it that if you don't see that, you're in trouble.
Well, dark humor is an example of intelligence. That's how you deal with catastrophe in the most creative way possible. So, yes. Okay. So, again, Simon Critch has written a boring book on humor on purpose. Great book. and he says that humor is fundamentally a form of intelligence. It's a form of stupidity not to be able to understand humor. Because you're lacking a level. It is when logos and pathos cannot collaborate.
And that's also the pathology of Sutra is a certain kind of humorlessness.
Yeah,
we're back on talking about, because that was our original topics. Sutra versus Tantra. So,
and not only do they lack humor, when they get stuck on the sutric side and can't be tantric, they also get pretentious.
Mm-hmm.
Pretentiousness is also part of that.
And passive aggressive.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the love and light brigade. I mean,
right.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And then they have to talk about how vulnerable they're feeling right now, and oh God, oh help!
How deep they are, and how authentic they are.
I'm feeling really vulnerable and not safe right now talking to you.
Yeah.
Help.
And ego death. It's always nobody's more obsessed with their own ego than the person who talks about ego death, because if you say, I experienced ego death, well, there was an I that experienced it, wasn't there? Your ego didn't die. You can't kill your ego. Blow up your own brain, and certainly your ego will be gone, because you'll be dead, but as long as you live, you'll have an ego. Yeah, pretentiousness. The pretentiousness is that quality. Yeah, they're around. They're around in their pretentious echo chambers, only seeing people who think like they do and using the same vocabulary, often with the same.
And also we're back to Girard again. And also they tend to be unconsciously searching for a scapegoat.
Yes.
Because there's this emptiness inside of them that, they have to find because they've become so love and lighty that they have to push down the dark side of themselves.
It's like the reversed order of classical scapegoating, because it's like they first turn you into a messiah and a guru, and then they go after you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Isn't that reverse scapegoating?
This is classical. This is classical sadomasochism, right?
Yeah.
That's Girard wrote a lot about that. So it's. I mean, there's this metaphysical desire and stuff like that. I mean, I love Girard because he explains all these very puzzling aspects of human behavior, like say the masochism, where does that come from? And I mean, it all fits into his grand theory of the human mind, which is basically, that's the program that Freud started and that Jung worked on and Lacan worked on, and Girard basically finished it, right? I think he's like Darwin. He's the Darwin of anthropology, I think. The Darwin of the human mind. I'm extremely surprised that everybody knows Freud and Jung and Lacan, and that Girard is comparatively unknown.
It only started, and Peter Thiel and all this will break Girard massively big. I mean, Girard over the next 30, 50 years, he will definitely be he will be one of the giants. I'm convinced.
Like Whitehead or something.
No, and I think in both in anthropology, where it's from Eliade all the way up to Girard, what I call the massive anthropological revolution of the 20th century. Anthropology exploded in the 20th century, almost on a par with physics. So it was a golden age for anthropology, 20th century. And it will be helped now with data, because a lot of the ideas from the 20th century can also be proven, because anthropology, after all, is supposed to be science. So, and Girard is the king of that. He's definitely the king of that. I read him the same way you do, Thomas, and I think he's amazing. But we'll all be Girardians. We are more or less already. I can't stop thinking about, you realize, the day you realize that people are just mimicking all the time, it is going to be one of the biggest events of your life to realize that that's what everybody does. That's what I do. Oh God.
And that's how you turn people into enemies, because you mimic, and that means that you're going to want what they want, but that means you turn them into competitors. So paradoxically, it's the people that you admire and that you really want to be close to. That's the people you're going to turn into mortal enemies, because you copy copy their desire.
Yeah. I think Girard made explicit, right, with what could only be expressed in like theater and literature before.
Yeah, he read Proust and
like Dostoevsky and Proust and Shakespeare and all those writers that were expressing what he was saying, but they could only do it in the form of literature, and he kind of made that explicit.
Yeah. It's an amazing story. Also, I've read his first book. What is it? Romanticism, and I don't remember what it's called. But so where he discusses all of these books, right? Dostoevsky, Cervantes, and he just shows that all the same mechanisms are just described again and again by these writers in different contexts. It's amazing. Stendhal as well. Yeah,
guys. I'd love to return to these conversations with you guys, and I'd got to read up even more on Girard and also reread him, which I'm doing at the moment while I'm writing the new book, and it's incredibly valuable. Highly recommended reading for anybody who follows us. So it's Girard. Pick him up.
Girard and Whitehead. That's all the rage.
Yeah.
And Trungpa.
And they fit together because
and Trungpa, yes. We are gonna start Chogyam Trungpa Appreciation Society, meaning that we're gonna create a Chogyam Trungpa Renaissance in the West.
Did you see I just had a podcast with Fabrice?
Yes, I do. Wonderful. He's beautiful, and would love Fabrice Medal. Oh, he's such a kind shaman.
He's the only guy that's ever been able to write a biography of Trungpa. No one's ever been able to write that biography, because he was everybody who met him had a different version of him. So it's like very difficult to actually.
Which is a typical trait for a crazy wisdom teacher.
Exactly. No.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's what Tantra will make you like that, right? You become, you can fit your personality to the environment.
Yeah. Because if it's process anyway, and you are relations,
it's process,
you have unique relations with each person you meet.
You're not an object anymore, fixed, rigid object, but you become a process, something fluid.
Yeah.
So that's the tantric attitude to life.
Yeah.
And of course, if the perfection of that is Dzogchen, because in the idea of in Tantra, there's still the idea of transformation, right? So there's still the idea of like I'm turning something into something else, and then with the level of Dzogchen, you kind of let that go. That idea that there's still a practice that you need to do.
And it works both in nomadology and eventology. So in nomadology, what I call it is vertical nomadology. So there is a journey you do, but it's your own journey throughout your life. That is like millions of years old, that idea. The idea of an eventology where society itself, the world itself, improves or changes over time is very recent. That is, I think, a great insight on our part is to realize that eventology only starts 3,700 years ago. So the idea of civilization starts then. And I mean, ultimately,
I'm glad now I get it. Actually, it's now the first time that I understand what you mean with this nomadology and eventology. So I've been a bit slow there. So I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, guys. This is awesome.
I love it. I love it.
It's really interesting because I was listening to your thing with Tom. Like you just had a podcast with Tom where you did a very nice job of laying out, your ideas, and then in these kind of conversations, which are much more chaotic and wild, we just go in so many interesting directions. And
I love both of them.
Do you think anybody can follow this? I mean,
yeah,
people are following it. Yeah, sure. There's lots of people.
But don't worry, only the clever guys will find it. So we have a Bard absolute here. That's quite natural.
Yeah, exactly.
He said only the clever guys will find it. The rest, they lose their temper. It's like Whitehead. Whitehead is publicly released, available to all, but only a few people can read him, and that actually saves him on the right side of the Bard absolute.
No, there's quite a number of people who follow this. I'd say about 1,000 for minimum for each podcast, and then some of them get a lot more. So
yeah,
but these are. I mean, it's amazing. I mentioned before. It's amazing that now we can just go to Amazon and just buy anything, right? Thousands of years of wisdom, and then start cross-linking this and discussing this like we did tonight, and that gives me a lot of hope. Because that means that a lot of new thinking is going on, a lot of new solutions can emerge.
Yeah, and we don't even have search engines tied to audio yet, but that's going to happen. That's one of the things AI will do for us. And then you can just say, when was this word first used in history? And it'll go and say, there was a certain podcast recorded this year at this date, 46 minutes, 11 seconds into it, here's the word. I mean, it'll be amazing. Amazing. That the machines will help us. They basically say, we got a huge library that expands all the time. And still, although it expands, we can just quickly, within seconds, find exactly what you're looking for at the right archive. Here it is. Now, it will be a massive revolution when it comes to learning. And I love that. That's the good
I think it's time to put some optimism in the narrative, because there's a lot of gloom and doom around. And of course, but I mean, humanity has always been on the brink of extinction. What else is new?
Yeah,
and at least now we have a lot of technology and philosophy and religion, and we can have a very fresh perspective on it, which I think is amazing.
I agree.
Well, that's why I like Alexander. You're constructive thinker.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but the new book is going to end on a good note.
Oh shit!
It's so much easier to be dark, but it's true. You're absolutely right, Thomas. Yeah.
So that's 2 hours, man. That was 2 hours.
Great. You got a lot of editing there, Andrew. We see how chunks work well.
That's great.
I love brutal edits, so go ahead and do it your way. And I mean it. I mean, I'd love to pick up this one again soon and just dig deeper into what we talked about. We do that naturally anyway. These are the things we love to study. So for the three of us, that's the easiest thing in the world, this sort of tantric brotherhood we just created. It's wonderful.